Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into Simon Sinek's The Infinite Game.
Oh, yeah.
You actually shared this book with us, and I have to say I was really intrigued by the idea of infinite games when it comes to business.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating concept. It really challenges you to rethink how you think about competition, how you define success.
It does. So, to kick things off, can you break down this whole concept of an infinite game for us? What does that even mean?
Okay, so imagine a game that has no end, no fixed set of rules and players that can come and go
Mm.
without really changing the nature of the game itself.
Okay.
That's an infinite game.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it, but how does that apply to business, though? I mean, businesses have pretty clear goals, right? Like making a profit.
Right, but you can think of those goals as more like milestones within the larger infinite game.
Uh-huh.
You see, the real goal of business, according to Sinek, is to stay in the game, to keep adapting, to keep innovating. It's about building something that lasts, something that contributes to a larger purpose.
So it's not just about winning in the traditional sense.
Exactly. Sinek actually argues that focusing too much on winning, on beating the competition, can actually be detrimental in the long run.
Now that's interesting. I'm really starting to see how this challenges conventional business wisdom. Can you give me an example of how this infinite game mindset plays out in the real world?
Sure. Sinek uses the example of the Vietnam War. He argues that the U.S. approached the war with a very finite mindset. They were focused on winning battles and achieving very specific objectives. But North Vietnam had a different approach, one that was rooted in survival and persistence. They're playing the long game, wearing down their opponent's will to fight.
So even though the U.S. won many battles, their finite mindset ultimately led to their withdrawal. That really highlights how approaching an infinite game with a finite mindset can backfire. It makes you wonder if businesses are making the same mistakes today.
Well, Sinek argues that they are. He points to the declining lifespan of companies on the S&P 500, suggesting that this finite mindset, this focus on short-term gains, is a major contributor to this trend.
I see what you mean. If you're constantly looking over your shoulder at the competition, trying to beat them at all costs, you might miss the bigger picture, the changes that are happening around you.
Precisely. And that brings us to one of Sinek's most compelling concepts, the idea of a just cause.
A just cause. Tell me more.
A just cause is like a visionary goal, something bigger than just making money or beating the competition. It's a cause that's worth fighting for, even if you know you'll never fully achieve it. Think of it as a guiding star that inspires you and your team to keep playing the infinite game.
Okay, I'm really intrigued by this idea, but it also seems kind of daunting. How do you even begin to define a just cause for your business or for your life for that matter?
Well, Sinek provides a powerful example of a just cause in action with the story of Nikolai Vavilov, a Russian botanist who dedicated his life to ending hunger.
Oh, I remember reading about him in the book. His story is incredible.
It really is. During the siege of Leningrad, Vavilov and his team risked their lives to protect a seed bank that contained hundreds of thousands of crop varieties. They believed that their work, even if they didn't live to see its impact, had the potential to save millions of lives. Now that's a just cause.
Wow, that's a truly inspiring example of commitment to something greater than oneself. It makes you think about what you'd be willing to sacrifice for a greater cause.
Exactly. And it highlights the power of a just cause to inspire and motivate people to achieve extraordinary things.
So a just cause is like the why that drives everything you do, the purpose that gives meaning to your work.
Precisely. It's not about what the products you sell or the services you offer. It's about the why, the reason you exist in the first place.
That makes a lot of sense. But I can also see how it would be easy to get this wrong, to confuse a just cause with something less meaningful. How do you know if you're on the right track?
Sinek outlines some common imposter causes that might sound good on the surface, but ultimately fall short of a true just cause. Things like being the best, chasing the next moonshot, or just focusing solely on growth for growth's sake.
Okay, that's really helpful. It seems like it would be easy to fall into those traps, especially in a business environment that's so focused on competition and results.
It is. And Sinek provides some specific criteria for evaluating whether your just cause is the real deal. For example, it needs to be affirming, inclusive, and ultimately unachievable.
Unachievable? Why would you want a goal that you can't achieve?
Because a just cause isn't about reaching a finish line. It's about constantly striving, pushing yourself and your team to be better, to make a positive impact on the world.
So it's like a guiding star that you're always moving towards, even though you know you'll never actually reach it.
Exactly. And that constant pursuit of a just cause is what gives meaning and purpose to the infinite game.
This is all fascinating stuff. It's making me rethink my whole approach to work, to be honest. But what about the people we work with? How do we build a team that can embrace this infinite mindset?
Well, that's something Sinek dives deep into in the book, and it's something that we're going to unpack next. He argues that building a trusting team is essential for playing the infinite game. And it all starts with prioritizing trust over performance.
Wait, what? Shouldn't performance be the top priority?
Well, that's what we've been conditioned to believe. But Sinek challenges that assumption. He argues that prioritizing trust creates an environment where people feel safe to take risks, to innovate, and to truly commit to a just cause.
Intriguing. I have a feeling you're about to shatter some more of my beliefs about leadership. But before we get into that, I think we need to take a quick break. Okay, so we're back and ready to dig a little deeper into the infinite game. Before the break, you mentioned that prioritizing trust over performance is key to building a strong team. Can you expand on that? How does that work in practice?
Sure, think about it this way. Would you rather work with someone who is incredibly talented, but you can't rely on, or someone who might not be a top performer, but who's always honest and dependable?
I'd go with the trustworthy person every time. But in a competitive business environment, how do you justify putting trust ahead of results?
Well, Sinek argues that a culture of trust actually leads to better performance in the long run. When people feel safe and supported, they're more likely to take risks, to be innovative, and to truly collaborate. He shares this really fascinating story about Rick Fox, an oil rig manager who transformed his team's performance by fostering vulnerability and care.
An oil rig. That doesn't exactly sound like a place where people would feel comfortable being vulnerable.
Right, and that's what makes this example so powerful. Fox realized that his team wasn't performing well because they were afraid to make mistakes. They were afraid to ask for help. There was no trust.
So how did he turn things around? Did he bring in a team-building guru or something?
He started by being vulnerable himself. He shared his own struggles, his own insecurities, made it clear that it was okay to not be perfect. And this created a ripple effect. It allowed his team to feel safe enough to do the same.
So by showing his own vulnerability, he built trust within the team. That's a pretty counterintuitive approach to leadership, especially in a tough industry like oil and gas.
It is, but it highlights a crucial point that Sinek emphasizes. Trust is the foundation for everything. Without it, you can't build a team that can truly thrive in an infinite game.
It makes me think about some of the leaders I've worked with in the past, some who created an environment of fear where everyone was constantly walking on eggshells. Definitely didn't bring out the best in people.
And that's what Sinek contrasts with Rick Fox's leadership style. He compares it to Jack Welch's approach at General Electric. Welch achieved significant financial success, but his relentless focus on performance created a culture of fear and competition.
Oh, yeah. I've heard stories about Welch's famous rank and yank system where he'd fire the bottom 10% of performers every year. Sounds pretty brutal.
It was a very finite mindset approach. It created an environment where people were afraid to make mistakes, afraid to challenge the status quo, afraid to be anything less than perfect.
And that kind of pressure can really stifle innovation and creativity, right?
Absolutely. People become so focused on not failing that they're afraid to take risks. They're afraid to experiment. They're afraid to think outside the box. Ironically, that fear of failure can actually lead to long-term failure.
Which is what ultimately happened with GE despite their initial success under Welch.
Exactly. Sinek argues that Welch's finite mindset, his obsession with winning at all costs, ultimately contributed to GE's downfall. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing short-term gains over building a sustainable culture based on trust and collaboration.
Okay, I'm convinced building trust is essential, not just for individual teams, but for organizations as a whole. But what about those outside our immediate circle? How do we approach competitors or rivals in this infinite game context? Can you really trust a competitor?
That's where the concept of worthy rivals comes in. Sinek suggests that instead of viewing competitors as enemies, we should see them as worthy of comparison, as sources of learning and inspiration.
So it's about recognizing their strengths and using them to push ourselves to be better.
Precisely. It's about finding that balance between respecting their accomplishments and staying true to your own just cause. And remember, a worthy rival isn't necessarily a direct competitor in your industry. It could be anyone who excels in a way that's relevant to your just cause.
So, for example, if my company's just cause is promoting sustainability, a worthy rival could be a company in a completely different industry that's doing an amazing job of reducing their carbon footprint.
Exactly. It's about seeking out those who are pushing the boundaries, who are setting a high bar for excellence, regardless of whether they're in your specific field.
This idea of worthy rivals is really challenging my assumptions about competition. It seems like it would be easy to get caught up in comparing yourself to them and feeling inadequate.
Oh, and Sinek acknowledges that risk. He cautions against what he calls cause blindness. That's when we become so focused on a rival, on their successes and strategies, that we lose sight of our own just cause.
So it's like we become so obsessed with the how of what they're doing that we forget the why of what we're doing.
Exactly. And that can lead us down a dangerous path of imitation and reaction. We start chasing their every move instead of charting our own course.
So how do we avoid this cause blindness? How do we make sure we're learning from our worthy rivals without losing sight of our own mission?
Sinek emphasizes the importance of having a deep understanding and commitment to your own just cause. It needs to be so clear, so compelling, that it serves as your guiding star, even when you're tempted to get distracted by shiny objects.
So it's about having that unshakable belief in your purpose.
Exactly, and it's about regularly reminding yourself and your team why you're doing what you're doing, why it matters. Because if you don't know why you're playing the game, it's easy to get lost in the tactics and the competition.
That makes a lot of sense. It seems like humility also plays a role here, right? Recognizing that we don't have all the answers and that we can always learn from others, even our rivals.
Absolutely. Humility is essential for maintaining an infinite mindset. It allows us to be open to different perspectives, to challenge our own assumptions, and to see our worthy rivals not as threats, but as opportunities for growth.
So it's not about trying to beat them, but about learning from them, about using their successes to push ourselves to be better. It's a much more collaborative approach to competition.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that even our worthy rivals are playing in the same infinite game. Their success doesn't diminish our own. In fact, their achievements can actually inspire us to reach new heights.
That's a really important point. It's easy to get caught up in that zero-sum mentality, thinking that if someone else is winning, we must be losing. But in an infinite game, there's room for everyone to succeed.
Exactly. And Sinek actually uses the end of the Cold War as a powerful example of what can happen when we mistake losing a worthy rival for winning the game.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What does the Cold War have to do with worthy rivals?
Well, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the U.S. declared victory in the Cold War. But Sinek argues that this was a mistake. By declaring victory, the U.S. lost sight of the bigger picture. They became complacent, perhaps even arrogant.
So they took their eye off the ball even though they had achieved their objective.
Precisely. They lost their sense of purpose, their drive to keep pushing forward. And without a worthy rival to challenge them, they started to turn inward, focusing on internal conflicts and petty squabbles.
That sounds eerily familiar in today's political climate.
It's a reminder that even when we achieve a significant victory, we can't afford to become complacent. We need to keep our eyes on the horizon, constantly seeking out new challenges and worthy rivals to keep us sharp.
So if the Soviet Union was the U.S.'s worthy rival during the Cold War, who is their worthy rival now? China.
That's a great question, and Sinek doesn't offer a definitive answer. He suggests that the nature of worthy rivals is constantly evolving as the game itself changes.
So it's not about finding one perfect rival, but about constantly reassessing who's pushing the boundaries and challenging us to be better.
Exactly. And it's about being open to the possibility that our worthy rivals might come from unexpected places.
That's a great point. It's about staying curious, staying humble, and always looking for ways to learn and grow.
And that brings us to Sinek's final practice for leading with an infinite mindset, which is perhaps the most challenging. Existential flexibility.
Existential flexibility. Now that sounds intense. What exactly does that mean?
It's about being willing to make bold changes, even disrupting your own business model, to stay aligned with your just cause. Think of it as embracing uncertainty, seeing change as an opportunity rather than a threat.
So it's about being adaptable, willing to pivot when the game changes. That sounds easy enough in theory, but how does that work in practice?
Well, Sinek uses Walt Disney as a prime example. Disney achieved incredible success with his animation studio, but eventually he felt stifled by the corporate culture.
So he just walked away from his own company?
He did. He left to pursue his vision elsewhere, to create something new and innovative. Disney understood that his just cause, his vision for entertaining and inspiring people, was bigger than any one company or project.
That's an incredible example of putting your just cause above everything else. Most people would just stay put even if they were unhappy.
Disney's willingness to let go of what was working ultimately led to the creation of Disneyland, a revolutionary concept that transformed the entertainment industry.
Wow, that's a powerful illustration of how existential flexibility can lead to groundbreaking innovation. But it also takes a lot of courage to walk away from something successful to pursue a risky new venture.
Absolutely. And Sinek contrasts Disney's bold move with Kodak's failure to adapt to the digital photography revolution. Even though they invented the first digital camera, their leadership couldn't imagine a world without film.
That's a classic example of a company failing to adapt to change. It makes you wonder how many other companies are clinging to outdated business models because they lack that existential flexibility.
It's a common trap. And Sinek argues that the key to avoiding it lies in challenging our own assumptions. We need to be open to the possibility that the way we've always done things might not be the best way. That there might be a better way, even if it means disrupting our own success.
So it's about constantly questioning the status quo even when things are going well.
Exactly. It's about embracing the unknown and seeing change as an opportunity for growth and reinvention.
This is all making so much sense, but it also seems incredibly challenging. How do we cultivate that courage to disrupt ourselves, especially when the stakes are high and the future is uncertain?
That's where Senek's concept of the courage to lead comes in. And that's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive into the infinite game.
I can't wait. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Simon Sinek's The Infinite Game. You know, you've really opened my eyes to this whole new way of thinking about business and leadership. And before the break, you mentioned the courage to lead as Sinek's final practice for an infinite mindset. I'm really curious to hear more about what that looks like in action.
Yeah, it's about leading with a long-term vision, even when it means making decisions that might be unpopular in the short term or seem risky.
So it's about having the guts to do what's right, even when it's hard, even when it goes against conventional wisdom.
Exactly. Sinek shares a very powerful story about Doug Parker, the CEO of American Airlines, who faced a really crucial decision during the 2008 financial crisis.
Oh, okay.
He was wrestling with whether to accept a government bailout that would save thousands of jobs, but also put the company into significant debt.
That's a tough call. What happened?
Well, Parker was actually on a flight back from Washington, D.C., and
Okay.
he overheard a flight attendant talking to a passenger.
Okay. I'm on the edge of my seat. What did they say?
Well, the flight attendant, her name was Mary. She was explaining that she had actually put her house up for sale to help her family make ends meet because she was worried about losing her job.
Oh, wow.
And that's when it hit Parker. This decision wasn't just about numbers. It was about people's lives, their livelihoods, their families.
That must have been a real aha moment for him.
It was. He realized that he couldn't lead with a purely financial mindset. He had to consider the human impact of his decisions.
So he decided to accept the loan, even though it was a big financial risk.
We did. He knew it's the right thing to do for his employees.
Yeah.
Even if it did make sense from a purely short-term financial perspective.
It sounds like he was really starting to shift from that finite mindset to an infinite one, recognizing that the well-being of his employees was actually essential to the long-term success of the company.
Exactly. And you know what? It paid off.
Yeah.
The loan helped American Airlines weather the storm, and Parker went on to lead the company through a series of mergers, creating the largest airline in the world.
So his courage to lead, his willingness to prioritize people over short-term profits actually helped American Airlines not just survive, but thrive in the long run.
Yeah.
That's a powerful testament to the idea of an infinite mindset. But it also makes me wonder, how do we cultivate that kind of courage, that willingness to make those tough decisions?
Well, Sinek argues that courage is like a muscle. It needs to be developed through practice and experience. And it starts with recognizing our fears, understanding what holds us back from making those bold moves.
So it's about facing our fears head on rather than trying to ignore them or pretend they don't exist. Easier said than done sometimes.
It definitely takes effort, but it's essential for growth. And it's about finding our own just cause, something we believe in so deeply that it gives us the strength to act even when we're afraid.
Because if we're not passionate about what we're doing, it's hard to muster the courage to take those risks.
Exactly. It's much easier to be courageous when you're fighting for something you truly believe in, something bigger than yourself. And it's about surrounding ourselves with people who inspire us, who challenge us to be better, who support us when we stumble.
So it's about building that trusting team, that network of support that allows us to take those leaps of faith.
Precisely. Because we can't play the infinite game alone. We need each other. We need people who will challenge us, support us, and remind us why we're doing this in the first place.
You've given us so much to think about today. It feels like you've opened a whole new world of possibilities, both in terms of business and in life.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that Sinek's book really does challenge the status quo and offer a fresh perspective on how we can approach work leadership and even our own personal growth.
So what's the key takeaway you hope our listeners will walk away with today? What's that one nugget of wisdom that can help them embrace this infinite game mindset?
Well, I think Sinek reminds us that the infinite game is a journey, not a destination. It's about constantly learning, growing, and adapting. It's about finding your just cause, building trusting relationships, and having the courage to lead with a long-term vision.
That's a really powerful message. It's not about winning or losing. It's about staying in the game, about making a positive impact on the world, and about never stopping striving to be better.
Exactly. And remember, the infinite game isn't just about business, it's about everything. It's about how we approach our relationships, our communities, and our lives as a whole.
This has been an incredible deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and for helping us unpack Sinek's brilliant work.
My pleasure.
That's our show for today. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.